Let's go ahead and pray before we start and ask the Lord to bless this subject matter. Very much needed subject matter. I've got a couple of calls this week, and anyway, it's very much needed. All right, Heavenly Father, thank you for opening the door for this subject and other subjects that we are dealing with in the series that we've passed, the past series and the series going forward. And Father, I just ask that you bless the work, that your truth goes forward in all of this, and that it falls on the ears that need to hear. Thank you again for your grace and mercy. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Okay, I want to again make that same statement I made last week, that if this is off-putting to anyone, give me a call and we'll talk about it. This is a difficult subject matter, but yet one that I feel definitely, needs to be out there, especially in light of what's going on across the country in not just the Southern Baptists, but I'm understanding in other churches as well. So I feel that, that God is in this, all right? We cannot any longer duck our heads in the sand about it. Okay, I want to also revisit just a couple of things. Last week, and this is where Jared saved me, he edited out the bell curve thing, and so glad he did. But I want to clarify something, because I looked at what I had written in my book, and I know that it might have been confusing for some folks, because I looked at it and I thought, why did I put that? So on the bell curve, they start out with pornography, that's the low addiction. Then the tolerance that I talked about, that's when the addiction is at its height. Then on the swinging down on the other end of the bell curve, I put low addiction. And that is true, and I want to clarify that. The low addiction is because they've already burned out everything. They don't even have the means to do the sexual addiction. These folks don't even have the dopamine left to get the energy to go do the deal out there. So I wanted to clarify that, because you've got low addiction, tolerance, and low addiction on that. And that's the way all addiction pretty much follows. So I wanted to clarify that. Another clarification, I mentioned the sex trafficking. And I didn't say that it is a multi-billion dollar, not $1 million, billion-dollar industry all over the world. Because of what? Because of the demand for illicit sex. So I wanted to clarify those two things before, we go into what the recovery and wellness looks like for both the addict and for the families. Families get as sick as the addict gets, and that's in all addiction. All families get sick too. So they have to get well, and oftentimes the families are kind of left by the wayside. But I think we've been addressing the family in both the past series with depression, anxiety, and trauma, and definitely addressing the family situation in opioid and alcohol addiction. And so we're going to address it tonight a bit in sex addiction. Okay. One of the things I want to read that I just to go forward on this on the page 69 and 70. So if you have your book, I'm going to read, and this is where when I talk about the fires, they're trying to put the fires out, and everyone's trying to put the fires out once it gets out of control in terms of the addiction. When you've got tolerance and you start down that downhill slope, everyone's running around and putting the fires out. So, and I say the final stage of sexual addiction. Okay, so number one, families are destroyed due to the marriage bed being interrupted. Sex with a husband or wife is no longer exciting, but mundane and boring sexual immorality with a total stranger becomes more exciting. And this is when they've gotten up to tolerance. And then down on the downhill swing. Financial problems escalate due to running up credit cards. The addict spends more on pornographic material, prostitutes, an enormous amount of money is spent, and this is what I want to focus on, topless bars. And the mind twist is these men throw money at women who are performing in topless bars, thinking the women are in love with them. I mentioned that in the opioid and alcohol addiction piece too. The performers are merely performing flirting with the men, so the men pay more for their attention. Visiting topless bars becomes an addiction in itself. Due to the attention, the men feel is genuine, but it is just a delusion. These women don't care. They want the money, and they make quite a bit of money. I dealt with those folks in Dallas. They make a lot of money. That's the attraction for them to not get out, is how much money they're making. And the attraction for the men is they think these women are in love with them. I had mentioned that before, but I just wanted to bring that up. There's job losses due to the addict never having any relief from planning and reviewing their sexual escapades, leaving work early or skipping work to hire prostitutes or call girls. Depression sets in due to the addict thinking that nothing in their world is exciting anymore. Everything around them seems too normal and boring. Several factors contribute to the lack of enjoyment of normal things, and we've talked about the dopamine and the depletion of the dopamine. Sexually transmitted diseases. And the addict, here's the catch-22. The addict lives with extreme stress and anxiety, but it's the stress and anxiety that gets them into the addiction. So it's that whole cycle. They're stressed, they're anxious, and it gets them into practicing the sexual addiction, but yet the sexual addiction increases the stress and the anxiety. So they never really have any relief from that. And for the Christian, a veil of darkness has now replaced the once cherished peace. Christians will long for what they once had, with no path to get back there except to ask Jesus for forgiveness and work to get into recovery. They will wake up in spiritual darkness and go to bed in spiritual darkness. Again, not to be confused with depression. This is a spiritual darkness. The depression does happen as well because of that decrease in the dopamine. That's your feel-good chemical. So they've got two things going on, spiritual darkness and depression. The sweet, intimate relationship they have with Jesus is now replaced by something sinister that has set out to destroy them and all associated with them. And then, of course, in the throes of addiction, sexual addiction, cocaine is commonly used. I mentioned that in the chemical dependency piece, that the cocaine gives them that false sense of reality, that the cocaine enhances the sexual act, when they only realize there's just another expensive addiction. They'll never get, they are always chasing that first high in the cocaine addiction, okay? All right, so now we're gonna go to how do these folks get well? How do they get well? Well, for an adult man, and I'm gonna say men, this also is something that women can suffer from, and do. They're just more closed about it, okay? And men are closed about it as well, but, I mean, they don't go megaphoning it anywhere that, you know, they're out visiting call girls and prostitutes. But first of all, the non-Christian has to admit they have a problem. That's the first step to wellness. Okay, I have a problem. And then they set out to do something about that problem. And the one thing is attend an all-male support group. Dallas had a mixed group, which I never understood, an SAA, Sexual Addicts Anonymous. They had a mixed group. Crazy. Because remember last week I said the one trigger for a man who is sexually addicted is a woman. So you have to wonder what if it was hookup or, and I mean that, hookup or actually they were there. I think they've changed that now. I'll have to call some people there in Dallas and find out if that's been changed. I sure hope so. Obtain a sponsor in Sex Addicts Anonymous. Now, these are people who are non-Christian, non-professing Christians. And this is about all they have. And then I'll get to the part about the Christian and what the Christian can do about it. Develop several positive images. Develop several negative images. I'm going to get into the positive, negative images in just a second. That is the real programming for wellness, and that's where the addict has to use the positive and negative images to do what? To stop the triggers and the cues. And hopefully they stop it before it's off and running. Carry no credit cards. I had mentioned my friend in my testimony. His first name is Tip. I had a release to do all that. I mentioned him. One of the things that when he was caught down on Harry Hines Boulevard in Dallas, in the van with a couple of prostitutes smoking crack cocaine, and he admitted he had had not only an addiction to cocaine, but he also had a sexual addiction. But what happened was when he was getting into recovery, I said, you can't carry money. That's a big trigger for you, or a credit card, a lot of money, or a credit card. And he said, well, I don't know if I can do that or not. And I said, well, let's do family therapy and get your family involved in this. So he had $5 a day. Now, that wouldn't go anywhere now, but that was back in early 90s, late 80s maybe. $5 a day. And he had to decide whether he was going to buy gas for that day or if he was going to eat that day or whatever he was going to do, but he only had $5 a day. So, and that's what I would suggest for anyone who has any kind of addiction. Very little money, because addiction costs money, and it costs a lot of money. Abstain from the internet for an indefinite period of time. And who knows what that's going to look like in terms of how long you abstain from the internet. Develop a plan to always be in a safe place. Because these folks always go into some really seedy areas of town, and that's also a trigger and a cue to go into those seedy places. So never go into those areas. Just always try to stay in a safe place. Counseling with a trained sex therapist. I have mentioned to the non-Christians, I said, first of all, I witnessed to them. Sometimes that was good, and sometimes they denied it. But in the case of Tip Ilm, I'll call him, even though I mentioned his name, I think, last time, he accepted Christ, and he wanted to do a deeper dive into Christian counseling, and so he did. And the result was wonderful. Okay, so adult men who are Christians. Okay? First, admit they have a problem. Again, ask for God's forgiveness, and that may be often. That may be many, many times, because the thoughts are always going to be there until they get way into recovery. You have to remember that these thoughts were on their mind from the time they got up, every nanosecond of every day. I mean, it's madness for them. It just captures the mind. And when I talk about they can't stay at work, they can't stay at work. They lose their jobs. They can't get free from the thoughts ever. And from the time they go to bed at night, those thoughts are there. And in recovery, they'll start to get a little relief from it, not right away, but they have to really work at recovery. And then I've had several of these folks tell me that after several months of recovery, they don't think about it every nanosecond of every day, but they still think about it. So when I mentioned last week that this sometimes is a years-long recovery, a 2 years long recovery. It's a lifetime of recovery, but it takes a long time to get past a lot of the triggers and the cues and the captivating the mind 24/7, a lot of time. Okay, so for the Christian, get in the Word about Bible study with a group of men with similar problems. And I think now we do have across the country several men's groups that have gotten together with the problem and taken a deeper dive into the Scripture. Keep no secrets with your spouse. No secrets. I mean, if you've had a thought, you talk about it. And I'll get on down. Sometimes wives don't want to know every thought, but you keep no secrets. Again, develop positive images and develop negative images. And I'm going to take a look at that because this is really pretty good stuff, and it works. This stuff works. So we're going to go to the book and see. I've got these numbered for a reason, okay? On page 75 to 77, I think is the positive images. So let's look at this. And I do this with also any addiction, the positive, negative images, okay? Because when you think about it, other than Jesus Christ himself, support groups, it's all up here. You have to use this with addictions. You can't take anything. You have to use your mind, and you have to use counseling, and you have to use support. So, but when you're alone at night, in the middle of the night, and this stuff comes visiting, and it will, not just sex addiction, but drugs and alcohol and the whole gambit comes visiting. The only thing you have as a Christian, you have the Lord, and you can cry out to him. And then you flip into, hopefully on a very involuntary basis, into the negative and positive image that the person creates. Now, what's good about the positive negative imaging, one size doesn't fit all. It's very individualized, and that's why this is used in a couple of treatment facilities because the counselors are sitting down and doing an actual question and then the answer, and then they're developing this person's their own positive negative image, okay? So how this works, on page 75, you have a person write down their personal goals, okay? Before that, the personal goals was get up, go to the ATM, get money, try to work, call my connection, go see the call girl, go visit the prostitute, try to go back to work, blow that off. That was their personal goals. Now there has to be some personal goals. And I remember one guy telling me, I said, look, you need to make a goal plan for the next, say, couple of years. He said, hey, look, I'm living minute by minute. I can't make a goal plan, And that's true, and that used to be my thing too. I can't make a goal plan. I'm living minute by minute. Not with sexual addiction. I want to clarify, I'm recovering alcohol. So I couldn't make a goal plan a year or two out. I had to make, one for the day or every other day. I couldn't make it way out because you can't. You just can't. You've lived in the addiction for so long that there's just no way you can look forward. But then you get used to doing it. So the personal goals would be something like, well, I used to play golf, or I used to do this, and I'd like to do that again. And so it may just be one personal goal that they make, but that's a goal. And then write down your relationship goals. Now I'm going to speak basically to the non-Christian because the one thing that they fear if they have a family, they do fear losing that family. They do. They hate it. And so that would be the one thing that they would Okay, in recovery, their family's still there. If they relapse or they get back in, the family's going. They're going to be gone. That's the negative image. Okay, you're going to develop what the most important thing in this person's life is. Okay, golf used to be. Now it's my family, just keeping my family at home. Okay. All right, for the Christian, I would always ask, what is your purpose in life? For the non-Christian, they would always say, oh, make a lot of money. Well, you see what money did for you. You know, it was a cue and a trigger to go visit the call girl, the prostitute, or wherever, you know. So the topless bars, that's what really takes the money, because hundreds of dollars go into those topless bars a night. Hundreds, if not, depending on how well off the guy is, thousands maybe. I mean, it's unbelievable the kind of money that goes there. So I ask the non-Christian, what is your purpose in life? It certainly isn't to die locked up in the back of a van with 2 prostitutes, you know. That's not it, and that could happen, especially if you're doing cocaine. I would always press that sort of thing. So it can be several things, whatever their purpose in life. As a Christian, it would be, well, I want to do God's will. Well, what does that look like? And they may know and they may not know. But I'll guarantee you the addiction has sidelined them for a number of years. So it's trying to use that positive image to get back into God's purpose and will. Okay. Any comments right now? I'm going to cue a couple of you to make a comment if you want to. And this is confidential. Whatever a person says in this room, let's keep it confidential in this room. And the folks watching via video, they're not going to see a face or know a name or anything. They're just going to hear whatever comes, whatever someone wants to disclose, okay? So, all right. Then for the non-Christian, on page 77, number 6, I say, what kind of legacy do you want to leave behind after your death? Do you want that legacy to be that you know, your whole life was spent at the topless bars? No, that would be horrible. As a Christian. As a non-Christian, they really, you know, it's usually something material, always. Something, well, I want my family, I want to leave them well off, and you know, I want generations to live off of what I'm leaving, and, you know, things like that. But for the non-Christian, for the Christian, it's a whole lot different. They want back into that light. And I know that as a Christian, that is their goal as a Christian who gets off into sexual addiction. They want back out of that darkness. They can't stand the darkness. And I hone in on that a lot, that spiritual darkness, because I know at one time they were Christians and they had the light, and then into the deal, there's no light. It's all dark. Even those dark topless bars, they're dark. That's where everything is dark. There is no ray of light. So that's I asked them about the legacy. Now, how does this work? Well, they take all the answers to this, and we put together the negative image, okay? And the negative image would be, okay, if you relapse, I want you to image this happening, okay? I want you to image, you know, losing your family. I want you to image losing your children. I want you to image that. And hopefully when the cue and the trigger comes up to want to call the call girl or go to the topless bar, that image pops up. This is where we hope that over practicing it over a time, and I tell them to practice it even when the cue and trigger are in there, to always keep that negative image going. And the other as well, the positive image. Okay, you get into recovery, and what's going to be the positive image? Okay, so they create getting back with the Lord as a Christian, getting back into church, getting my family into praying together. And that is the positive image. But one relapse undoes all of that. One relapse. And you would think, well, how could one relapse? It does. It does, because the veil of darkness comes in on the addict immediately. And once that's been triggered and they have fallen into it, they're off and running again. There's no stopping them. It's stopping them before the actual act takes place, okay? So the positive negative imaging is going on all the time, all the time. I use this stuff, okay, with various things, okay? The positive negative imaging, okay. If I stay in the positive, I really think that this is going to happen or that's going to happen. I used it heavily when I was newly into recovery. I'm the one that wrote this out of my own recovery because, because. And it was knowing that one drink was going to undo and unravel everything that I had set in motion for myself in recovery. And it's the same thing with the sex addict, the gambling addict, the opioid addict, the alcoholic, the eating disorder, disordered eating, all of that. Recovery brings you into a positive light. One relapse takes you back into a very dark place, and it always starts the addiction over again. Remember, addiction is just waiting at the door knocking. It is just knocking and knocking and knocking. And all you have to do is open that door. And when you open that door, it's as if all the work that you have done immediately is gone. It's gone. It's not that it's a little bit gone, it's gone. So there you go. That's it in terms of that. Okay. So there's a recovery plan for the families, okay, to, in terms of what's going on. I have asked a couple of people to, I was going to ask them, I've got a couple of people, they're not going to be on tape. No names are going to be mentioned. Nothing to identify anyone, period. This is a different subject matter than drugs and alcohol and gambling and what have you. This is a lot different. This has this has a, I don't know, it's just not something that people want to megaphone anywhere. Like I said, they don't want to do that. And I don't blame them, because we live in, well, I don't blame them. So I'm going to, ask for the volunteers. I think you and I talked, yeah. And, maybe you and I have talked, but if you don't want to, you just say, I don't want to do it. So let me, if somebody will come and get the microphone for this person over here, and just take it back there. And I'm going to ask the question, but then you feel free to answer it how you would like to answer it, okay? All right, so my understanding is there was a family involvement with someone that was sexually addicted. And I guess the question would be, when did you realize that you were involved with a sex addict?
Well, I was blindsided by it. I had been married for 25 years at the time, and I discovered a paperback book in my husband's suit pocket that was shocking. We were both Christians, both active in our church, and I thought, well, who in the world put this in here? I mean, I just had a real hard time believing it. And I don't know if everybody knows a whole lot about how homeschool families work, but some homeschool families, and quite a few of them, cleanse their homes of anything that could be satanic at all. I mean, they're very, very ultra-conservative, and we were. And so to have something like that discovered was really shocking. So I confronted my husband, and right away it was just minimized. Oh, that's just nothing. I mean, that's just nothing. And so over time, I realized that I was working with an addiction. But I also found out that there were very few people where we lived that knew how to handle that, the sexual addiction. He was a professional, and yes, the money didn't line up. When I look back after discovering that, yes, this was an addiction, I realized that some months we were $600 and $700 off base because I was doing the books. And now I understand what may have happened.
Yeah.
Likely from your description was happening.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, that was part of the confession, which I asked for. I said I don't have a lot of motivation right now to continue after having brought this in our home, after you're having brought this in our home. So you might want to just start at the beginning and share everything. And that was part of it,
Okay.
along with women through the years.
Okay, I'll ask you a couple other questions. And I want to touch on, actually, there was a book written by Joanne Condy, and I'm going to read a section in there about reality, because I think it was last week I mentioned gaslighting in here. Didn't I mention it last week? Okay. So this is gaslighting. When you approach the addict and you confront them about what you know is your reality, and remember, it is your reality, okay? And you have to, but your reality will be tested, and you'll start to walk away and think, maybe this really isn't to the depth that I think it is, because they will mess with that. And I'm going to read what she said in a minute, what Joanne Condy said. It's really, really good. But what were your feelings? Let's see. I should put those glasses on. What were your feelings when you were in the marriage, and describe how it made you sick too? What were you feeling as you were you knew your reality, and you knew what you believed to be the truth, but then you were getting this, maybe it's not as bad as it could be, but describe the sickness that you felt, both emotional and mental sickness, and maybe even physical sickness as a result.
Well, I was devastated. And I knew that divorce just wasn't in my vocabulary. So I thought it'll be fixed. Recovery is right around the corner. There's no way he will allow me to walk away. He loves me too much. So there was a delusional period there on my part, and a little bit of a Pollyanna spirit, like, this will go away, like he says. It's not a big deal. And I wanted so much to believe that I would hang on to those words and think, we're going to get beyond this. And what I had seen for years as depression, now I believe was a battle between the spirit and the soul.
Yep.
And a result of, probably even before we were married, the act of addiction. So, yes, it was devastating. I kept it from my children the best I could for the first 18 months. And by accident, quote unquote, there was a list of sightings discovered on our computer by my son. I immediately asked for him to come home from work. The reason he could get by with $600 or $700 of expenditure is because he was a good professional. He did well with his profession. He came home from work, and then our children knew about it. And they too now were devastated. Asked him to not teach Sunday school anymore. Very concerned about, where all has this led you, Dad? You have taught us Bible in our homeschool setting. What's the real truth? And they were just torn all to pieces.
Okay.
And
Did
so
you?
was I, in trying to make
So, would it be right to say that it captivated your mind too, 24/7?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because by nature I'm a peacemaker. I wanted everything okay. I wanted everybody happy. I wanted everything fixed. And 10 years later, when the questions that Joanne Conde, who was, by the way, the angel that God gave me from Focus on the Family, when she taught me about the addicted mind and the addicted voice and the addicted actions,
Mm-hmm.
then I realized that I had to draw the line in the sand. And that first point that you made, that they would own the problem, never happened.
Yeah. Yeah. The denial can go on for the rest of their life, or they can, suit up, show up, and say, "Yeah, I've got a problem and I need help," and that would be what we would all hope for. And okay. So you drew the land in the sand. I was going to ask you that. When did you finally, say enough's enough, and you just said that?
By this time, I had been phone conferencing with Joanne Conde from Focus on the Family, probably on a weekly basis. And she said, "You do know that you're allowing oppression in your home by not drawing a line in the sand.
Mm-hmm.
You do know that Satan has an active part in your home."
Mm.
And so it was 10 years after the fact of discovering that I knew enough now to draw a line in the sand. And so when I got the response that I did, and I was in counseling with her on a phone basis, she asked that I come to where she worked, Focus on the Family, and
Mhm.
have intensives.
Mhm.
So for 4 days, I went by myself and
Good.
had that counseling. I realized I couldn't carry the marriage on by myself,
No.
and I needed desperately for him to say, "I won't let you walk away. I'll do whatever it takes." But when I got the answer, why would I seek help? For what? I knew that it was hopeless. This side of a miracle from God. And had it not been for God, I wouldn't have made that 10-year journey. So all the glory goes to him anyway.
And it does. And when your husband said, "Why would I go for help?" I think it was Martin Luther who said, "Your God is what your heart relies on and trusts in." And if someone's in the throes of addiction and they refuse to give it up, that's what their heart relies on and trusts in. We rely and trust on and in Jesus Christ. So you had dark and light in your home, dark and light, dark and light. And the Satan is alive and well in a lot of homes today, a lot of churches today. And unfortunately, evil hides in the church sometimes. And we that's not my stuff. That's just, well, the fact that it hides in the church, that I made that statement. But we see it in the news. We don't, sure proven in various denominations. It has hidden in the church for years. And I happen to think that, like I said a couple of times in here in the series, that Satan doesn't have long. Jesus is coming, and Satan doesn't have long. So he's using every tool in his little tool bag, his little trickery bag, to destroy, kill, steal, and destroy everything. So, and this is one way. When I talk about sex trafficking, human sex trafficking, being a multi-billion-dollar industry, why? Because the demand is there. There was no demand, it wouldn't be a multi-billion-dollar industry, would it? It wouldn't be. It would be a couple $100,000 industry. But because the demand is there, which is so sad to me, it is, it's his tool. It's the way he can tear up families and tear up churches, etc. Okay, so how long did it take you to heal from that relationship?
part of my healing, I think, was watching the pain of my children and what they went through. That was tough.
God bless you, sweetheart. God bless you.
After I came to the understanding that obviously that addiction took precedence over all of us, including me, and that a nameless person on the internet was being chosen over me, my self-image under God's leadership was better than that. And I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that God loved me more than to deal with that.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
so, healing, I moved out. I was the one that filed for divorce, something I thought never happened, never happened. And I had a business at the time, so that was my oasis. And how long did that take? Well, I know that I was in counseling at the time at the local level and continued with Joanne Condi as well. And God was incredible in the fact that I did not contract an STD. Now, you all are probably just thinking it was just pornography. It was not just pornography.
Yeah.
I was so grateful for that. She gave me a personality test while I was at Focusin. She said, God has so protected you mentally that it's unbelievable.
Yeah, he does that.
And he had.
Yes.
Not only physically, but mentally and
Yes.
emotionally. And I had one of the most phenomenal support groups ever. So through all of that, I carried on my business. I didn't date for about a year because I wasn't ready to be hurt again, and I knew I had to be ready to be hurt again to do that. So life for me went on, and my God dependence went right on. So,
Yes, and he did protect you. His veil of protection was all around you. And so the very last thing is my favorite verse. I use it in my own life, my testimony. Romans 8:28 states that all things work together for good for those that love the Lord and called according to his purpose. So what do you think in all of that, what good in there do you think is going to still come out of that, you know?
well, I mean, right now, I feel like that God has opened up maybe an opportunity to share with someone else that might be in the middle of this, because I was lost in what to do. I did not know the mind of an addict. I didn't know their practices. I honestly was just naive. And so if God could use, I don't want it wasted on me. I want to be able to use it to encourage someone else through those steps.
He's going to use you.
It's a maze.
He's going to use you.
It's a
I
maze.
believe that. He's going to, right here at Valleydale. I believe that.
I pray so.
Okay. All right. I want to read what the book is called Aftershock. I thumbed through it, and her name is Joanne Condi, and this one thing jumped out at me as I was skimming over it.
Cathy, while you're looking for that, can I share how God brought her to me?
You bet you can.
Okay, just one night after having prayed for all these years, God sent help because nobody here knows enough to help me with this addiction. I got a call from Focus on the Family. Thank you for your little donation. How can we help you? My daughter was going through a horrendous divorce. At the time, I said, I need help. Can you send me information on pornography and alcoholism? That was what her deal was. They sent me the brochure that Joanne Condi wrote. I read it and thought, if I had known enough before, I could have written this because it spoke to me just like that.
Yep.
I called Focus on the Family and said, I need to be in touch with this author. But even when she called me, I said, I need to hear your testimony because by this time I was so jaded with other counselors that did not know what we were talking about. But she did.
Yep, she does. I went through this. I'm going to read it when I've got the time to do it. But
And I thanked God for that.
yeah, here's what she wrote. It was, intentionally remember the truth. And this is for all of us. Without remembering the truth, no problem can be solved. And I do believe that. I believe you've got to speak your truth. Whether people stand up all day and say, you know, that's not the way it is, that's not what you're saying, that sort of thing. You speak your truth, you own it. And she said, pornography is dangerously addictive and damaging. That's the truth, and that is the truth. So when someone says, oh, he's just a kid, he's out there just looking at girly magazines, or he's on the internet watching some soft porn. Well, what is soft porn? I don't even know. You know, so, and I hear that. I have heard that. It's no big deal. And that's usually the non-Christian families, not the Christian families. The Christian families, I think, take this a lot more seriously. So, but the urgency of this truth can easily become minimized in your mind if you are repeatedly told that pornography isn't a serious problem. Your husband's words are powerful and influential, and because of his own shame, fear, and need for the companionship of his addiction, he may desperately want to prevent you from turning his pornography use into an issue. You know the truth, but when he denies or dismisses his unfaithful behavior, he can plant doubts in your mind. You may question yourself again and again as you move through your day. After all, we live in a culture that's saturated with pornography or near pornographic images. What's the big deal after all? Tragically, you know what the big deal is. You live with the results of your husband trying to believe that a lie is the truth. The lie is that pornography use is no real problem, but here's the truth. And then it goes on to talk about other aspects of that. But remember, you know, and I always go back to that bell curve. It has a progression. And what starts out to be, like I said last week, benign, turns into something malignant. And once someone is in the throes of any addiction, but this one particularly, it is the worst quagmire to try to get out of. It is unbelievable trying to get out of something like that. I mean, I've watched it time and time. And the one thing I can think of before I left Presby in Dallas, I had a client, and his addiction both to cocaine and to sex addiction, and they do go hand in hand. I mean, there's some sort of evil thing in that, but he couldn't. We had everybody working with him, and very successful businessman in Dallas, and he goes out to one of the farm-to-market roads and takes a 357 and right there in the car. And the family said, the wife came to see me after that, and he said many times, I don't know how to get out of this. I'll never get out of this, and I can't live with it the way it is. And that's the truth of this addiction. That's not a lie. So what starts out as no big deal ends up a huge, huge problem. Thank you for sharing that. I really, really, really appreciate it. And I know there's maybe people listening that hopefully will get something from all of that, okay? Okay. For families, again, you pray for forgiveness toward the spouse. You've got to ask for forgiveness toward them because you end up disgusted with what's going on. You end up not liking them. You end up at times hating them. And, I mean, this is what I've heard from families. So you have to pray for your forgiveness toward your feelings toward your spouse who is in this. Families attend a Christian support group. There's lots of spousal supports for SSA, Sex Addicts Anonymous. There's lots of support groups for Al-Anon. It's called Al-Anon for Alcoholics Anonymous. Nar-Anon for opioids. I mean, there's all kinds of spousal support, but here's the difference. For the non-Christian, it ends up being a gripe session. I've been in there just years ago just because I wanted to see what was going on. course, I'm the recovering addict, so I wasn't welcome probably, you know, after I told them. I didn't go back because it was a gripe session, and their spouse was getting beaten up terribly in this group session. So I would suggest for the Christian to go to a Christian support group, and I know, again, the churches have these. I don't know what churches in Birmingham, or I don't even know some of the churches in Dallas. Well, I take that back. I think there's a Methodist church, Lovers Lane Methodist Church in Dallas, has huge spousal support. You know where Lovers Lane is in Dallas. Huge spousal support for both alcoholic and opioid addicts, and I think for the spouse of a sexual addict. There,
several Celebrate Recovery. That's kind of along that line.
Celebrate Recovery, I forgot about. Celebrate Recovery is good. They have something for the spouse. Counseling with a Christian counselor, okay? Yes, because if you're a Christian, you need someone who understands your belief system. But make sure that they also know about that side of sexual addiction. And oftentimes those folks that are trained in sex therapy for couples also know about how horrible and how hard the addiction can be, okay, the sex addict's addiction. So someone, I would say, who professes to be a Christian, but also has had the certification as a sex therapist, okay? And then go see them. The family needs to go see them because the family has to get well too. Daily Bible readings and prayer. Open communication with your spouse. Again, you've got to be able to talk about it. You've got to hopefully encourage them to talk about it. Now, I've known some spouses, like I had mentioned a little bit ago, they don't want to hear it. So then that leaves the person to go, you know, to counseling or have a sponsor, lots of sponsors. I think in the church there are disciples. They disciple people. Is that right? Is that correct? Disciple? Well, I know some churches disciple folks. So yeah. So I think it would be that. Find someone in the church that can disciple you as a family member who, again, has been there, and that may be a role down the road, you know, that you can do. Make a plan to care for yourself because the spouse gets really sick and not any self-care because oftentimes they get caught up in, I know this term is used, you know, kind of too often, but they get caught up in that codependency part, you know, trying to get them on their way, and then they don't do their own self-care. So make a plan for good self-care. No shaming the spouse. Now, this is big, I think, because a lot of, you know, I don't know, I'd have to have someone that has researched this, but my guess, I theorize again that the shame around their addiction has been because they probably practiced this as a very young child and they were shamed, okay? And I talk about that for the teenager here in just a minute, but you can't shame them, and you can't shame anyone about it. That's why it's open dialogue. You've got to talk about it. But you have to be taught to do that because the first thing is to point the finger, you. And that's not, you know, that's not what we're to do. I do know that much. Anyone else want to disclose anything or make a comment about something?
I have a question.
Okay.
How do you tell the difference between whether it's a sexual addiction with your spouse or whether it is, I just want to get out of this marriage and have to get a divorce?
Well, you wouldn't know unless you had some sort of evidence that there was affairs, that there was call girls, that there was topless bars. you'd have to have the evidence, I think. That would be my guess. And if you've got clear-cut evidence that that's what's going on, much like the person that was talking a little bit ago, clear-cut evidence, then, yeah, that, yeah.
Just so you know, it isn't this spouse that I have now. But I'm thinking back about a very similar situation.
Give her the mic there for a second, so the people, no, we can hear you, but the people on tape can't hear you. And nobody, you're not on tape, okay? You're not on tape.
Okay, I don't even, is this on?
Yeah, it goes into the tape. The sound goes into the tape,
Okay.
and we can hear you here, but,
Denial was a big thing for a long time, but yeah, evidence was there,
Okay.
and I was just like you, this lady here. I didn't believe in divorce, and we were very active in our church, and so that went on for a long time, and there were several people who came and accused him of seeing their wives, and it was a total denial. I mean, very much believable that, hey, this really didn't happen, and this is why. And I wanted to believe it, so I did for a long time. But there's a whole long story there that I'm not going to go into right now, but another question I have for you is, do you see a lot of that happening in families where the father also was addictive to sex?
will you clarify that for me just a little bit?
All right, if for instance, I know that my father-in-law had this really serious sexual problem, even though he was a pastor,
Mm-hmm,
and then I married his son,
mm-hmm.
and yet he had two sons, and one wasn't, and one was.
Well, that that behavior could have come, in the son's knowledge of what his father was doing. It could have. We do this argument we have for years, nurture versus nature. Some folks from the nature side, from the genetics, have a stronger sexual drive than others. I mean, it's biological. And, it's a God-blessed thing in the right form. But some are more sexually charged, if you will, than others, and others are, actually, some people can go just the opposite. They don't not even have a thought. So you don't know. You don't know whether it was the son watching his father's behavior, or the father was loaded genetically and he passed it on to the son. Could have been. I mean, we really don't know in that case, but that's it.
Has there been any research on that?
I don't know, but I tell you what, I can look into it. I like to do that. I usually end up calling a number of people that I've worked with that, are into that sort of thing, and I can call them up. When I call, they know it's not going to be a 5-minute phone call, so they very seldom take my call right away. So, but I'll call and I'll find out. I'll have an answer for you, maybe on campus here somewhere. You flag me down, or I'll flag you down, and I'll have an answer.
I can tell you in my experience that it was definitely the father's influence.
Well,
Okay.
in these families that I know of, just in 40 years of ministry,
Take that.
I see
Oh.
that. I think it is the genetic thing. I think sometimes there is a pattern. Not always true, because like you said, there's several children, maybe one got the genetics and one didn't, just like all your children are wired differently, right? So I think that's
I think what
definitely.
makes it so hard for Christians is
let's pass that, so, because it looks like I'm just sitting here, you know, just doing nothing.
I think with Christians especially, when you are very active in a church and you have a background of also your family being very active, it becomes a question of, do you want to obey the Lord in this, or are you choosing, I'm talking about the spouse, are you making a obvious choice to not want to obey, not want to ask for forgiveness, and continue in that lifestyle and expect your spouse to just go along with it because we are a Christian family, we don't want this to get out?
You know, coming into a relationship with Jesus Christ, we do want to do whatever it takes to obey Him. But the Scripture also gives us a way out if there's something like that going on. And when you've got a family, you've got children, you've got that unit, it's very difficult to take that walk. It really is. For the non-believer, it's easy. And for the non-believer, sometimes there's that open marriage. And I know a couple of people that I know a couple of people that have an open marriage. And I run around with a lot of non-Christians. But I feel like sometimes maybe I'll rub off on them in a good way. But, they're very open with me, and then, they know I'm non-judgmental. I don't judge them. I just say, well, that's you, that's not me, that sort of thing. But, for the Christian, we do have a set of rules to live by. We do want to do what is right. We do ask ourselves all the time, what's the right thing to do here, But again, thank God the Scripture, I mentioned last week, Jesus Christ was the best philosopher. He had them all beat. He's got an answer for everything in that word. And we just take that and go in there and do a deep dive, and we'll come to that conclusion with His help. That's about the best way I can answer that. Okay? But you're right. For the Christian, it's tough. For the non-Christian, it's whatever goes. And I'll guarantee you, it is shocking. It is whatever goes. Let me just go ahead and finish here. I want to mention about the teenager, because I think this goes right along with what Christy was saying last week, too. I mainly put it with the father that, the father, when a family finds out their teenage son or daughter, but I'm using son in this case, when they find out that the teenage son has a problem, and don't be naive and in denial that your teenage son is not masturbating, because he is, okay? He will, Christian or non-Christian. I know that might be off-putting to some folks, so call me if it is, but I would be hard-pressed in this day and age that they're not. But when it is found out, then the protocol there for intervention, it would be intervention. Where is my page? Would be the father opens up a non-shaming dialogue, and you said the mother, and I like that, and I mentioned her in here, okay, about the sex addiction and its progression. That's the main thing, and no shaming, that it's an open dialogue. And my guess is the teenage son might not open up right away. He'll be in denial about it, but the dialogue should be opened up often until he comes together and says, yeah. And even, I think they'll start to see some change if they'll open up a non-shaming dialogue. The father continues to set aside time to discuss the sexual, I put sexual sin. It is a sin. I believe the Bible calls it self-love. I don't have the scripture verse, but my guess is that's what that means. Father, if applicable, he discloses about his own problems as a teenager and sexual desires. That all is that big secret. Everybody has this huge secret, and nobody is to cross over into their secret. But I think when you've got kids and you've got, the children there that are experiencing these things, I believe that's the right protocol for it. The father discusses the importance of maintaining abstinence until married and the benefits of doing so. Abstinence. Well, they should talk about it anyway. Mother sets aside a quality of time away with the son to discuss her perspective as a woman. In other words, not pointing the finger at him, not even bringing up what he's been doing, but her perspective on how it affects women and how a progression of sexual addiction would affect her, and go into whatever she feels like going into as far as the sex is concerned. I wouldn't do it. I would say to the mother not to start out, with that deep discussion, but start out sort of like a light discussion about it. And then again, sending the young man or the young woman counseling with a Christian counselor who is certified in sexual addiction for sex therapy, but a Christian, because a non-Christian sex therapist is just going to be okay with it. It's just the thing to do. So that's what I would, that's the protocol for wellness and recovery. I appreciate my support system being here, because I'll tell you what, this is not easy, but yet all the outings in all the churches, not just our denomination, but on other denominations, the Methodists, the Presbys, the Catholic Church, all of it, this is what can no longer stay a secret. No longer can it, because it is the secret that has caused them to become predators, okay? And that's another thing with trauma, sexual trauma, but I'm not going there. But that's it. Any comments or questions about what we've covered tonight?